Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos Ribbits and, do you know, I think I probably always have been. Well, let's start today's programme with a question. When is an opera not an opera? And that's not a facetious question. Opera, of course, is all part of the world of musical theatre. In fact, there's a spectrum, I think. Starts with musical cabaret, which is intimate. It then goes on to pantomime, musicals, as we know them, operetta and opera. And that's the kind of spectrum. But of course, they are fairly arbitrary barriers. I mean, what makes an opera rather than an operetta or a musical? Now, we don't talk about opera much on this programme. Opera is extremely well served and has a great many magazines, podcasts and other ways of pushing itself forward. It is also, I think, seen as slightly highbrow, which isn't necessarily the case. And a good example of that is the Magic Flute. The Magic Flute is a very popular opera. I believe it to be the 4th or 5th most performed opera in the canon in the world. So we're talking a Premier League show, and of course, first produced in 1791, it hasn't got anything to prove to anybody. It's been running for well over 200 years. But is it an opera? Well, of course, it's popularly perceived to be so. But is it? I mean, at a thumbnail sketch level, what do you know about opera? Well, I was always told that operas on the whole ended tragically, and that operettas on the whole ended happily. And that was a difference. Now, of course, that's not always true. As we know, Gilbert and Sullivan's The Yeoman of the Guard, clearly an operetta, ends with a death of the central comic character, not a happy ending. And let's face it, the Magic Flute is popularly conceived to be a comic opera. It's certainly an opera with a comic character all the way through it. And as you'll hear in the interview that's coming up a bit later in the programme with the translator of the Magic Flute into English, Kit Hesketh-Harvey, it's not easy to identify what the Magic Flute actually is. Is it an opera? Well, yes, but also no. So, if that's the case, I think it's legitimate for us to talk about it here on Musical Talk because it clearly is part of musical theatre. And as we'll discover, it also came out of a European version of what we would understand as pantomime, at least British pantomime, with a kind of raucous, seasonal extravaganza. It wasn't originally written as a cultivated piece of highbrow art, and so we shouldn't be put off talking about it because it isn't that. It's a highly accessible piece of musical theatre, and we're going to discuss it today. And even better, it's going to be accessible for us because it's been translated into English. Now, regular listeners of this programme will remember that I've interviewed Kit on several occasions, usually about opera or cabaret. Well, today it's on his opera end of the scale of this very versatile man's work, because as you'll recall, 2 years ago he translated Offenbach's La Belle Hélène, a very definite operetta, into English and renamed it Troy Boy, and a very good show that was too. And last year he was responsible for translating La Traviata, a very clear-cut opera, into English, and won great plaudits for that. That went on national tour and even got as far as Malaysia. Well, this year he's working again with the Merry Opera with his own translation of The Magic Flute by Mozart, a show which he's also directing, alongside musical direction from Stephen Hose, who's the musical director of Opera UK and worked with Kit on both Troy Boy and La Traviata. Together with the Merry Opera Company, they have an ambition to bring opera to a wider audience by using modern English, and I have to say I applaud that very much. I'm not really an opera fan, I'm going to say that now, but I don't mind putting my toe in the water periodically, particularly if I know I'm going to understand it. And so I hope that everyone who goes to see the Magic Flute will feel rewarded for having tried. The Merry Opera Company is designed to bring opera to the masses, and I am one of them. I'm a massette. So, before we get into the interview, how is the show described? Well, here's the way it's been described on its own website. Part pantomime, part opera, promising already, Kit Hesketh-Harvey's new production relives the Magic Flute's sublime music and triumphant opening night in 1791. Lofty divas and low comedians flourish. watching closely the shadowy forces of Freemasonry, and the composer, Mozart, fears he is being poisoned. A delight for opera connoisseurs and newcomers alike. And as so often, Kit has put in a huge amount of thought and work into the show. And he's come up with a, I think, rather splendid framing device, which is that Mozart himself will appear in the show. And Kit has found several parallels between Mozart's life and the story being told in this, his last opera, because he died within 2 months of its opening. Well, that sets the scene for the Magic Flute. Let's hear from the director and the translator himself, the marvellous Kit Hesketh-Harvey. I caught up with him at London's Riverside Studios in Hammersmith over his lunch. And as you'll hear straight away from the beginning of the conversation, you'll hear what that is. And I do hope you'll enjoy this fantastic discussion about the hows, whens, whys, wheres and wherefores of this English translation of the Magic Flute, and the importance or otherwise of the differentiation between opera, operetta, musicals, pantomime and cabaret. Musical talk.
Listeners don't mind my eating lamb hot pot.
I don't think they have any objections to you eating all the lamb hot pot. I think that looks lovely.
Vegetarians out there might be cross with me, but it is very good lamb hot pot.
Kit, thank you so much as always for your time.
Always a pleasure, Tom.
And,
always a pleasure.
Allowing me to scrape a little of the talent that you have off for my humble wares. But I'd like to ask you a question which I think you're almost uniquely suited to answer. In musical theatre, there are so many different forms. Musical cabaret, which you've been involved in for years.
Years and years and years.
Pantomime, which you've
Pantomime, which I've just done at Guildford. I gave my Ebenezer to some screaming children. That was lovely.
There's musical theatre in its own right. Musicals, you've been in Salad Days and things like that. You're no stranger to operetta, because we saw your La Belle Hélène Troy Boy a few years ago. And of course you've done full-blooded opera with La Traviata and now the Magic Flute.
Well, my thesis is that the Magic Flute is a long way below Traviata if there is a pecking order from full-blooded opera down to pantomime, because it was written as a pantomime. It was thrown on in a howling hurry weeks before Mozart died.
Yes, it's his very last work, isn't it?
It's his last work, if you include the Requiem, which he was writing at the same time. Emanuel Schikaneder, was the owner of the Theater an der Wieden in the suburbs of Vienna, which was not an opera house. It was a sort of vaudeville, music hall, rambunctious place where the Viennese went to roister and laugh and watch parody. And so Mozart, when he wrote the Magic Flute, was writing in the knowledge that he was writing for a very separate audience to that to which he was usually used. The trouble is the Magic Flute, because of all the ritual and Masonic overtones, has got this sort of Salzburgy congealedness about it of high opera. It's not. It's much closer to pantomime. It was written for the winter season. Emanuel Schikaneder was a comedian rather than an opera singer. His troupe included some fine singers, including Josefa Weber, who was Mozart's sister-in-law and the first queen of the night. But it was written as a panto script, which explains why it's full of all these curious inconsistencies and reversals of tone and knockabout comedy. But at the same time, Schikaneder and Mozart were members of the same Masonic lodge, and Mozart was writing about the rituals of Isis and Osiris. This is Zoroaster, the high priest's great moment.
That's in Act 2, isn't it?
Well, yes, it starts in Act 1, but it's principally in Act 2. And what it seems to me is about, against all this high comedy and low comedy, is an essay on how to die, how to pass from the world of Osiris into the world of Isis and the passage to death, according to the old Masonic beliefs. Mozart was dying, knew he was dying, was convinced he was being poisoned while he was writing it. And so there's this very, very dark subtext to it, which is kind of autobiographical. I've been involved, I think this is my 7th flute. What happened was I wrote a translation for Scottish Opera way back 2003, 2004, which went on in their season, and it was fine. Since then it's been done at Cambridge, it's been done at the Rosslyn Chapel outside Edinburgh, which is the most extraordinary place. It is actually Zoroaster's temple. It's a Masonic chapel built by William Sinclair, who was the founder of Scottish Freemasonry, and is the whole architecture shrieks Masonic ritual at one. And then it's just recently been done and is presently on tour with a Scottish opera revival directed by Sir Thomas Allen, which has been a stonking great hit, and is done on the grand operatic scale with Victorian steamworks and industrial revolutions and Lord knows what going on, in a very grand opera production. Coming back to Merry Opera, which is a company who's putting this on at the Riverside, and for whom I've worked twice in the past, we're on a very, very different budget and with very different forces. We have a company of some dozen, and we have no budget. So I had to find some way of making this one different from the concurrent version of my adaptation, which is being done in Scotland. So I scratched my head for a bit and then thought, well, maybe there's a way of inserting a play. So it's an opera within a play, i.e. that Mozart is being commissioned by Schikaneder to write this piece. It's going on, the rehearsals happen, the first night happens, and then somewhere in Act 2, Mozart dies, as he did. Well, it was premiered on the 30th of September 1791. He was dead on the 5th of December.
It's very shortly afterwards.
Very shortly afterwards, and he died during the performance. And there are wonderful biographical details of him being although he attended the first performances, conducted, had great fun, by a few weeks later, he was too ill to attend. He was staying at home and saying to his wife Constanza, what time is it? It's 8 o'clock. The Queen of the Night will be coming on now. And so within the context of the opera, we have this play, Watching Mozart Die, which to me makes a lot more sense of all the Masonic mumbo-jumbo and becomes terribly telling. Because in this version, therefore, Tamino, the hero, is Mozart, Pamina, the heroine, is Constanza, Schikaneder, Papageno, is Schikaneder, who was the first Papageno. And
Papageno is the principal comic role.
He's the principal comic role, and he has 3 enormous comedy numbers. It's written very much. Schikaneder, who wrote the libretto, made sure that he had a good part.
Is there a part for me?
Is there a part for me? Well, yes, because I wrote it.
Yes.
And the Queen of the Night is Mozart's rather tiresome sister-in-law, Josefa, who wanted the part of her career, the role of her career, and by George, she got it. So we see her in Act 1 as this callous-like diva arriving at Mozart's rather humble apartment. By the end of the piece, we are in the Theater an der Wiede, and she's giving it full welly in the famous aria that hits all those top Fs. So this seemed to be a different way of addressing it and giving the audience some ideas to feed off, which would make it different from the sheer damn spectacle of a full Grand Opera House production. So I'm going to eat some lamb stew now.
With my blessing. But in a way, I think what might be termed a simple framing device is in fact actually integral to helping you understand the plot. So it's not just a way of hanging the songs and hanging the story.
No.
It seems to me you've fused it, properly fused it with the libretto and the story.
I hope so.
But also, if I may say, it's a rare thing to offer the public a chance to see a 222-year-old, should we say, piece of musical theatre with the composer in it. With the composer
as the hero.
Yes.
And, of course, we have huge fun switching between the reality of Mozart's apartment and the world of the theatre, and these rather louche, dissolute characters who surrounded Schikaneder, with whom Mozart had the greatest fun in the last months of his life. It also delivers a double emotional whammy, I hope, in some of the big numbers. Pamina's great aria Eichfuss, when she's contemplating her rejection by Tamino and life without Tamino, becomes therefore Constanza contemplating her own widowhood. I'm a great fan of Constanza. She's had such a sort of bad press from the Peter Schaffers of this world that that she was this flighty thing, obsessed by dresses and always going off to Baden-Baden and being constantly pregnant, which meant that Mozart was dragged down by what Charles Causley called the pram in the hall. In fact, Constanza, and the clue is in her name, I think, was fighting off the creditors who were coming to steal the furniture. She was hawking this and that to just to pay off the debts and give Mozart enough space and time to write. And I think
A constant wife.
A constant wife. I think those who have criticised her are taking a very anti-feminist stance. And I think she was a good girl, and she emerges rather movingly as very much the heroine of this. And so the big reconciliation scene in Act 2, when they talk about facing the trials, facing the death, which is normally done as a joyous sort of reconciliation, is a very much more touching, intimate death scene. Mozart is actually dying in her arms as he did. And Constanza, after Mozart's death, crawled into the bed with him to try and catch whatever it was he had so that she could die with him. And that, I think, makes the Act 2 reconciliation and terribly moving, and makes sense of all the lyrics about we will face death's portals without fear, we will go through. And what, of course, saves Mozart forever is his music. He becomes immortal. Our Zarastro is based on Ignaz von Born, who was the head of Mozart's lodge, Grand Master of the lodge. And we include a contemporary remark that every man must fear death, but the artist doesn't fear it because he knows that he will be immortal long after the bodies of kings have perished. And what is the key and the talisman to that is, and again the clue's in the title, the magic flute. Mozart hears the flute music that he's written, and that makes him immortal. Therefore, he and Constanza can pass through death's door and stand forever, which they do.
So soul's immortal through work, as it were. Also,
through art.
Yes,
through
indeed.
art.
I also very much, I just admire the fact that you found, as you so often do, you think these things through so carefully and so intelligently that you found a way of making a song which has always had this particular meaning, which, as you say, the reconciliation between the couples, means so very much more. And in fact, actually, let's be honest, you quite rightly said that compared to La Traviata, this doesn't necessarily have the same emotional backbone or sense, but you've helped impose and infuse that into the work.
I hope so. And it's extraordinary watching it on stage because of this double text going on. Sometimes you're almost playing against the lyrics, with the result that you get this extraordinary emotional punch in the solar plexus. The trial scenes, when Tamino is meant to be going through fire and water, become the completely hideous medical treatments that Mozart himself was enduring just before he died, in those sort of rather gothic 18th century poultices and red hot pokers and icy water and so forth.
Hot jars. And
all those things.
Yes.
And again, I hope that's another way of looking at an almost over-familiar piece.
But actually, I think I'd like to refer to my original question, because, and you've mentioned, and it's in the advertising, that it's a comedy, it's a fantasy, and it's got pantomime in it. That's actually one of the ways it's being advertised. So, specifically for the Magic Flute and generically, how valid are the separations between opera, operetta, musical, pantomime, do you think? Because this, in a way, the Magic Flute it's songs with dialogue, isn't it? It's Schauspiel, I believe.
It's Schauspiel. It is
so
written as a pantomime would be written. And there are occasionally extraordinary sort of twists in the tone, which may have been because they were writing it on the hoof and throwing it together in a matter of weeks, except, of course, being Mozart, he couldn't but infuse the music with genius. But also, there are those kind of moments, right, we're leaving that part of the plot, and now we are about to go into a number, and here is the setup for the number, which you get in Panto, absolutely unjustifiable in terms of any dramaturgical or psychological way.
Front of curtain moments as well.
Exactly.
Yes.
They tend to be papagenos, they tend to be chicanedas, and so we also watch Papageno/Chicaneda's delight in the fact that he's clearly got a palpable hit. It's people were crowding in to see it, and you couldn't get a ticket. It was, ironically, the thing that would have saved Mozart financially had he lived, because the shekel started rolling in. So we watched the triumph of this piece, and Chicaneda's rather sort of plump delight that he's got a hit on his hands. In terms of panto, therefore, we're playing a lot of those, as you say, front of cloth scenes, straight out front, with no pretense at psychological realism or dramatic integrity. This is the comedy moment, and sit back and enjoy it. And what few resources I have in the name, in a number of bodies on stage, then become the audience at the Schikaneder's Theatre, relishing this amazing piece that has suddenly landed in Vienna, with, in the flickering corner, Mozart dying.
Yes, so you've just got that sort of sand in your oyster.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And it is kind of Shakespearean. You then have the fun of the three boys/ladies, and again, as in most cut-price productions, they have to be played by the same people. Just putting on panto masks and changing gender that way, we don't try to sort of look for huge, subtle dramaturgical justification or psychological justification for what the boys represent or the girls represent. They are simply scene shifters or shape shifters.
It's almost in a way that you found a way of taking something which, if you read the plot straight off, you would say that this feels very much in the sense like a 1930s, 1920s musical theatre plot, in the sense that it's a jolly way of hanging some songs, but it probably doesn't amount to a great deal of beach, we say.
Exactly.
But there are ways of making it meaningful, and everything we've been speaking about so far has been that.
I hope the audience picks up on it. I hope the audience doesn't also feel that we're just doing a sort of documentary about Mozart's death and last hours. We have obviously borrowed, not literally from Amadeus, the Peter Schaffer piece, but Mozart's conviction that he was being poisoned, the sense that the Freemasons might have been involved in his death because they were furious with him for revealing too many Masonic secrets, not only in this piece, in the music, the constant, the three knocks that happen all the way through, the three chords that open it, but also in music that he'd written previously, where he'd kind of given Masonic secrets away. There are all these lovely Da Vinci Code rumours about, how he died. And I think we can allude to those and let the audience make its own mind up. But the clues are all there for the telling. We're not making too much of old Salieri, because, as I say, Peter Schaffer's trodden that path, although he does get a mention, because the reason Mozart was in such financial straits was that he didn't get the post of Kapellmeister. That went to Salieri in the year before. And we've invented a character who's Mozart's rather hard-pressed maid at the flat, maid of all work, who has desperate ambitions to become an actress and a singer. And so when Schikaneder comes to the flat, she uses her talents. And we watch a star being born, Josefa, the old mistress, being discarded, and Schikaneder taking up with this maid whom we've called Flotty, who eventually, of course, emerges as Papagena, and in those lovely 11 o'clock moments, the star is born, and we watch our little grisette making it to the stage in stardom.
That's splendid.
But she also usefully acts as a narratrix for some of the circumstances we have to set up.
But if I ask you to strip away the traditional the labels, because this has always been described as an opera, although it has often been thought of as a sort of a comic-y opera without being a comic opera, an opera with comic elements. But as we said, it's got spoken dialogue rather than sung dialogue. As you say, it came out of almost a kind of pantomime tradition in some senses.
Yep.
It's so much more than that. It doesn't fall into the obvious trappings of what people think opera is. How would you describe it?
I think it is unique, actually. I think it's a kind of happy accident. Schikaneder thought he was writing a nice little pot boiler which would keep his audience happy for the winter. He had the serendipitous luck to choose as his, composer of incidental music, the greatest musical genius who's ever lived, and therefore it suddenly and necessarily becomes elevated to a very different plane. And also that Mozart had his own private agenda. He was writing his own, what he thought was his own requiem. He was facing his own certain death. Constanza, his wife, knew that her husband was dying, and so he couldn't but dwell on eternal human truths and philosophies, which, just because of historical circumstance, elevate what should have been a knockabout panto into a very, very great piece of art. And a piece of art up there with Shakespeare, because, of course, Shakespeare, in the same way, will have tragic heroes contemplating death and then a knockabout comic scene.
Yes, indeed.
And it's because that is what life is like, that they are so accurate and so true and move us so deeply. Whereas, Parsifal, you're just swathed in gloom and longing for a joke, really.
And bringing it slightly more up to speed, actually, the second act of Sweeney Todd by Sondheim. If you don't have that song about By the Sea at the beginning of Act 2, which to me always feels slightly crowbarred in, Act 2 is not a happy act.
No.
It doesn't it only gets warmer in the sense that the furnace is open. There's no other way.
Yes, I think like all these things in theatre, if you have sharp contrasts, each pole benefits.
Yes.
By the change between them. We could have gone full tilt on all the Masonic stuff, and we do within the slender limits of our own resources. But the fact that Schikaneder was also a member of Mozart's lodge kind of connects the two and gives us a justification for suddenly cutting to a frontal plot scene where he's flirting with his audience and saying, "Come on, ladies, won't you when you come with me?" And eventually, of course, he gets his Papagena, and you get the big comedy number. I've had huge fun translating those jokey Papageno lyrics because that's something I completely delight in.
And you're so good at it as well.
Well, I don't know, but good at it.
We discussed previously as well that you said that if you can find the joke and make it land at the appropriate moment in the structure of a song, you get rewards well beyond
what you should have. Exactly so. And Papageno is clearly a comic name, and I don't know who wrote that wonderful hippopotamus lyric. Not the Flanders and Swan one, but there's another one. But the problem that sticks in my throat is the girls never papagay notice. Won't one of you ease my distress and say to me, "Papagay, yes"? And it's really just picking up Schikaneder's clues and reassembling them in another language, but landing the yes joke or the notice joke on the end of the phrase, and then you reap the rewards.
Rearranging your verbs, as you always have to with German.
Less so in German. I love translating to German, actually, because it's much closer to English, and you don't get so many of those bloody feminine endings you get in French or Italian, which don't really sit terribly easily with English.
Except in the names of the characters, incidentally, of course.
Yeah. But again, we've double cast, because you can't ask the Queen of the Night to sing night after night. So we have a Queen of the Night and a Queen of the Not each night, or a Tamino and a Taminoff, or a Zarastro and a Zarastroff, a Papageno and a Papagay Not, and they take it in turns each night to sing the principal.
That's something I like about the Merry Opera Company, though, but actually you can see it more than once, and you'll see the same show, but with the same people, the repertory company, if you like, but with different people playing parts you've seen previously done. And that really brings it to life, because you just see slightly different interpretations. You think, oh, that's there as well, or I didn't see that yesterday, or, oh, he's not doing what they did yesterday and I'm getting something else.
I'm very resistant to making an identikit performance when two actors are playing the part. I think each actor must bring his own qualities to the part. And yes, then you get those variations and changes. But also, as you say, the repertory company, you get that sense that you are in Schikaneder's theatre. Yeah. And all these guys did have roles. So the absolutely junior character is Taminoff every night. And he's the one who is in charge of the thunder sheet. And terribly proud of his role as the rattler of the thunder sheet. So he's our little comic junior member of the rep company who, every time there's thunder, has to waggle his sheet. And gradually, as the world of the opera takes over and the opera begins to get a life of its own and a public of its own, and Mozart becomes less important to the story, they put on more and more makeup. And so by the end, we are completely in the finale of Schikaneder's theatre, and he has a howling success, and we have a built-in curtain call into which the Queen of the Night erupts like Janet Webb to take the biggest curtain call of all. Because she is, after all, the diva.
Yes, indeed.
And she has sung all those amazing notes.
Now, just a minute ago, you were talking about a sort of historic circumstance. But actually, I think, is there anything, have you drawn anything from, and do you think Mozart drew anything from, the times in which they were writing? 1791, of course, not in Austria, but in France, we've had the French Revolution. We're headed, we're well into the reign of terror now.
And Marie Antoinette, of course, was the Emperor's sister.
Yes.
Oh, very much so. I think that's why Mozart kind of wrote it. He was sending a coded message to the new emperor saying, Freemasonry is okay, don't be mistrustful of it. we are going to lead you into the era, usher in the era of enlightenment. You are going to be the enlightened emperor.
And the Queen of the Night is an autocrat.
And the Queen of the Night is, I think, also a coded reference to the Dowager, as she was by that stage empress, who had a great standoff with her husband. The Dowager Empress believed that women should be admitted to Freemasonry. Mozart himself felt the same. And so the whole Magic Flute is a sort of manifesto saying, yes, enlightened Freemasonry is okay, you needn't mistrust it, even though it contains some revolutionary theories, and even though I, Mozart, have written Figaro, which was seen as a terribly revolutionary piece because the servant triumphs over his master. Mozart believed, I think, a lot to do with his own incredibly close relationship with his wife, that enlightenment meant that men and women should be equal. And so Zarathustro's problem can't be solved until he has got Tamino, the perfect prince, and Pamina, the daughter of the Queen of the Night, reconciled and resolved and made union of. It's exactly the same as Prospero in The Tempest. Miranda needs her Ferdinand for all the previous generations' mistakes to be resolved.
And in an odd way, and in a historically truthful way, I suppose you could also argue the Wars of the Roses were resolved that way, by marrying the houses. But
not my period, love.
Oh.
No operas then, I'm sorry. No, I'm sure you're right. I my history kind of stopped. No,
one clever marriage connection
is that what it was?
Brings two houses together.
My history lesson started with the Tudors, I'm afraid, which was just after all that. But no, exactly so. I should know my Shakespeare better, shouldn't I?
Well, I was going to say Romeo and Juliet shows how it doesn't always work.
But
so
no, I'm just saying it is, as you say, very, very much an opera of its time. And again, Mozart being Mozart, leaves all the musical clues there that you don't get the resolution until Tamino and Pamina are singing in duet.
Well, what I like, of course, you've said it's almost a historic accident that Mozart himself was writing the music for this. And taking us back to that immortality, his work made him immortal, but he made his own work immortal because it was him in the first place. So there's a nice little recursive loop for you.
It is.
Write that down on a piece of paper.
Round and round we go. Round and round we go. Which came first, Mozart or Mozart? But I think so. I think he was aware of his genius. I think he poured into the Magic Flute some of the most ravishing music that has ever flown from any pen. Also, my oddly favourite number is the Papageno and Pamina duet in Act 1. And there, in this staging, it's the beginning of the rehearsals. We watch Scicaneda / Papageno and Pamina sing this completely beautiful duet, man and wife and man, heaven on earth since time began, which is Mozart's credo. It's also his love letter to his wife. And within our little play, within a play, we watch the actors hearing this for the first time and realizing that they are privileged to hear something as great as this in that moment, and that their composer of incidental music has written something which will not only endure musically forever because it is simply perfect, but also contains the germ of Mozart's credo about masonry, that you have to have a woman and a man, and that's the secret to a happy existence.
Well, yes, that's his philosophical point. Gilded, if I may say.
Gilded, but set in, like all these things, a perfectly simple and perfectly beautiful tune. And you just get that radiant humanistic warmth that comes out of every note that Mozart wrote, that he remains my favourite composer because he is so utterly human, and yet he does translate us to the level of the gods. And that's what happens in the finale of the Magic Flute, that the power of the Magic Flute transfigures us through the art to the level of the gods.
As it did for him.
Yeah, absolutely, despite the fact that he was spewing bile and smelling and about to explode with with this mysterious illness, which might have been the consequence of being poisoned. It might have been malarial fever, not malarial fever. I mean, there's all huge tomes have been written about what actually killed Mozart. And we leave that all open. The fact was that he was dying when he wrote it, and that's what's so terribly moving.
I think, mind, you've had such a long relationship with this piece. You know, you've translated it on several occasions. He's your favourite composer. Over your years and, you know, your own relationship, this perfect relationship, if I may say,
No.
what has changed for you? Have eyes been opened? Have you discovered...
No, nothing, just
it's
as
a
with
constant
Shakespeare.
relationship.
Constant relationship, but more and more wonder. More and more wonder that
So you just find
such a
greater
man
depths.
could have written so perfectly, so much in such a short time. You know, he was dead by 35, which is, you know, when most composers get going.
Yes.
And yet he wrote this astonishing amount of work. And even as he was writing the Flute, he was writing the Requiem, which again is, you know, a transcendent piece of music. That he was Amadeus. It did just kind of flow into him and flow out of him with no sort of restrictions, because he happened to be Homo sapiens, a human being who had a brain and arms and fingers to write with. It just kind of poured into him and poured straight out. Absolutely perfect music. I mean, Schaffer gives Salieri that amazing speech to the same effect in Amadeus, which is how, like Salieri, we can just, or Caliban, we can just sort of reel back in wonder at this, but at the same time be joyful that our culture contains such a man.
That we have our occasional geniuses.
We do have our occasional geniuses, and for me, Mozart's right at the top of the tree. Mozart, Shakespeare, and Praxiteles probably. I don't know who it is in sculpture, but certainly in terms of music, which I agree with Mozart is the highest of the arts, and I think opera is the highest form of music because it corrals all these other disciplines, drama and visual feasts and lighting and blah blah blah, choreography in with it. This is, for me, the most perfect piece of music ever written, perfect piece of art actually ever produced, despite the fact that when you first look at it you think, what a bloody mess.
Which brings us perfectly to the opening question, which is what's the validity between the different definitions between opera, operetta, musicals and pantomime?
The definition is that there is no definition.
It's just it's a spectrum.
Life is too rich, and Mozart realised that, and we must celebrate our human imperfections, and that way we can turn ourselves into gods.
Well, Kit, I feel I've been in the presence of such...
Frick off. My rapidly congealing stew now.
but you're
As I've rabbited on.
But forgive me, thank you. It's been so lovely talking to you. You've given me such, and I hope everyone else, such an insight into what you've done, which, as I said before, you just layer intelligence and heart onto works which are already worthwhile.
Well, thank you. I hope so. And I hope that those who perhaps saw Troy Boy or saw Traviata will come along to this. There's a shift of venue. We used to live in Highgate, we now live in Hammersmith. But otherwise it's the Merry Opera ethos, which is to make opera available to people who might not have considered it, but also to people who are over familiar with it, just to say, hey, look, there's another way of looking at this.
Just turning it that little bit and saying, look, there's a different aspect which you may not have seen. Kit, I will congratulate you already, because I know it'll be great. I also wish you the best in all the world, but you don't need my wishes, because you've been consistently clocking up brilliant bits of musical theatre in its widest sense. For many, many years.
Well,
but in the
thank
last few
you.
years, that, your portfolio expands and expands, and long may it do so.
Thank you, Thomas. How kind. I just hope that or Scottish Opera is noticing what I'm doing down here at the Rock Face, and maybe next time I'll get a budget.
Musical talk. That was the one and only and very, very splendid Kit Hesketh-Harvey, and I always enjoy talking to him because he's not just fantastically entertaining and funny, but he's also, generous with his time, as you heard, I mean, that hot pot was cold by the end of the conversation, so I'm extremely grateful to him for giving up the opportunity to eat a hot meal during rehearsals to talk to Musical Talk. But also, I love the passion and, of course, the thought that he puts into it. I'm certainly going to go along. And I hope you will too. Here's how you can do so. It's on, as I say, at the Riverside Studios in Crisp Road. It's literally 5 minutes from Hammersmith Tube Station. And will be going on national tour. But it starts in Hammersmith on the 7th of February, that's this Thursday, and runs to the 3rd of March. So you've got about a month to try and catch it. Tuesday to Saturday nights at 7:30, with also a Sunday night performance at 5 o'clock, well worth trying to get to, and a Saturday matinee at 2:45. Ticket price is incredibly good value. You can phone the box office on 020-8237-1111, or you can go to the website www.riversidestudios.co.uk, or you might want to pop along to www.merryopera.co.uk. And marvellously, there's a national tour, which means that if you can't make it to London, you might be able to make it somewhere else. Here's where it's going. 5th of February to the 3rd of March at the Riverside Studios in Hammersmith, as we said. Then on Friday the 15th of March, you can see it at St George's Theatre in Great Yarmouth. The day afterwards, Saturday the 16th of March, at the Memorial Theatre in Broadstairs. On Sunday the 7th of April, you can go to the Wetherspoon Opera House Pub in Tunbridge Wells. Marvellous. Opera and pub and Tunbridge Wells. Words that seem to go together perfectly and yet probably oughtn't. If you're in Norwich on the 22nd of June, which is a Saturday, you can see it at the Playhouse Theatre. Lovely little theatre, I know it well. Then it's back at London for the Scoop, which is the amphitheatre outside the Greater London Assembly Building. And it's there for several nights, Wednesday to Friday, 26th to 28th of June. A good chance to catch it again. Then on to Henley, the Kenton Theatre on the 29th of June. It plays as part of the Lamberhurst Festival at Bayham Abbey Ruins in Kent on the 3rd of August, and then rests a little bit before coming back to life in a way that actually Mozart didn't, you know. And you can see it on the 1st of November at the Rondo Theatre in Bath, and then finally at the Corn Exchange in Wallingford on the 2nd of November. But do go along to the Merry Opera website, www.merryopera.co.uk, to find out if any further venues have been added. Don't be put off by the fact it's an opera. As we very clearly discussed, it's not really an opera. This is a lovely, small, intimate, funny, clever, thoughtful musical theatre piece, made all the more so by the wonderful Kit Hesketh-Harvey, and I'm extremely grateful to him. Do pop along to see it. Musical talk. Well, to conclude today, I hope you'll indulge me for just a few minutes as I sort of ponder on an important question. Now, this is going to be a fairly long-winded story, but do stay with me. I was watching the television the other day, unusually one of the independent channels, and I caught an advertisement, and on it was a piece of music which you may well know. The song's called Tonight You Belong to Me. Not, I must say, the song from Cabaret Tomorrow Belongs to Me, which is a very, very different piece, but the song's called Tonight You Belong to Me, and it's currently being used on British television to advertise an aeroplane company. Now, it's a very catchy number, and having been hooked by the opening piece of music, which you may know, goes ba-ba-ba-bum, ba-bum, bum, ba-ba-ba-bum, ba-bum. Although you belong to someone new, tonight you belong to me. Bim, 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 bim. You get the idea with that. It's that rhythm that makes that catchy. Having been hooked by the rhythm, by the song, and by its orchestration, I got thinking about the song, because that song is popularly conceived to be a 1950s number. And in truth, that is when it became famous. But it's not a 1950s number. It's actually a 1920s song. It was originally written in 1926, and its first big recording came from somebody called Gene Austin, a crooner not often remembered these days. That's a male Gene, by the way, not a female Gene. And his version of the song was recorded in 1927. And it did tolerably well, and then it slumbered. And nobody thought of it very much until it was revived in the 1950s. Well, first by Frankie Lane, another male singer, but then more popularly by two singing teenage girls called Patience and Prudence. And that was the big hit. And then on, it was covered in almost exactly the same way by lots of other people, including the Lennon sisters and many further others. But always thereafter as a duet or a bigger number, never a solo. And I started thinking to myself, I wonder if this is significant. Stick with me here and I'll explain why this relates to musical theatre as we go along. In the 1950s, a lot of songs from the 1920s were covered, but they were covered in a very different way. As you probably know, the 1950s saw the beginning of rock and roll introduced the beat. But even before that, the 1950s had been experimenting with rhythm. 1950s songs have, on the whole, obviously not always, but on the whole, the hits of that period have a kind of homogeneous rhythm to them. The songs start in a particular way, they set up the rhythm, and then the song goes all the way through to the end, using that self-same rhythm. You get a very strong sense of the piece from the very first few seconds. Very few surprises in a popular piece of 1950s music. And so it is with the song Tonight You Belong to Me. As I've said already, it has that very popular, catchy rhythm, ba-ba-ba-bum, ba-bum, bum, ba-ba-ba-bum, ba-bum, bum, which goes on all the way through to the end. Now, the problem with rhythm is that whilst music can adapt to fit it, and so the melody of the songs can either be improved or not, but can certainly keep up with the rhythm and can hold their own against it, lyrics, unfortunately, have to become subordinated, it seems to me. I'll give you two examples. In the 1950s, the famous British singer Alma Cogan, and she really was one of the big names in British popular culture at that time, covered a song from the 1920s called I'm Blue Again, which is a marvellously funny song with a sad edge, but mostly a funny song written by the great lyricist Dorothy Fields. Now, Dorothy Fields actually recorded a version of this song herself, so we can take that as being definitive. And in that version, the song, which is all about a woman who has fallen out with her lover because they always squabble, but she's upset because they're apart, but she knows full well that when they get back together again, they'll continue to squabble, and then she'll be blue again, and it goes on and on like that. So it is actually a comedy number. It is punctuated with timing and comic inflection, and it really is a great piece of songwriting, because not only do you have a good melody, the lyrics mean something, and if they're delivered properly, you have a musical theatre song. When Alma Cogan did it, she did exactly as you would expect from a 50s cover. There was a strong rhythm, which is perfectly enjoyable. The melody stands up to it and therefore takes you from the beginning to the end of the record very easily, but with no changes. It's very homogeneous. But the lyrics suffer. Because the rhythm doesn't allow for a great deal of interpretation of the lyrics just become a ditty to sit on top of the melody. That's one good example. The second is the one we've already been discussing, Tonight You Belong to Me. Exactly the same thing happened. You had the rhythm set in, the melody fits very nicely, and indeed is hugely catchy. Let's face it, that is why people listen to it, that is why it became a hit in the 1950s. But unfortunately, the lyrics became subordinated, and indeed were not just subordinated, but the meaning was lost. It may surprise you if you know the 1950s version or any of the later covers of it, which only sings the chorus rather than the verse, that the verse sets up a completely different setup. In the original from the 1920s, Gene Austen sings how he has lost his lover, his female friend. She's in the arms of somebody new. He can't get her back, but he knows that if he dreams about her overnight, then tonight she'll belong to him. It's all about the continuing to imagine that the relationship was ongoing in your dreams, and then comes the bitter sadness at the end of the night when the sun comes up that isn't so, that when dawn comes along you'll be gone, which is more or less what the lyrics say. That's what the song's actually saying. In the 1950s version, the lyrics don't have room to breathe, they don't have room to speak, they don't have room to give any sense. So you lose the verse, you go straight into the chorus. And also you don't have any room for interpretation. So the lyrics have to be sung dead set on the rhythm, which unfortunately means that it has a very curious interpretation in the 1950s, because it goes straight in and suggests that whilst I know that you are with somebody new, tonight you belong to me. and it makes it sound as though they're having an illicit last night of passion before the object of her love goes off with somebody else. It's a very strange circumstance. First of all, why would someone who's already left you to go to somebody else come back for a last night? And why would you be satisfied with it as a kind of goodbye to the relationship? It doesn't make sense emotionally. It also suggests slightly rude and crude behaviour, to be honest. It's a last knock-up before you disappear into the arms of somebody else. I'm sure people in the 1950s didn't see it that way, but I think in the 1950s no one was really listening to the lyrics anyway, because by then lyrics were becoming subordinated. Now, here I come to the point. If the 1950s misinterpreted and misunderstood the songs from the 1920s, so many of which were covered in the 1950s, and the reason for that is because rhythm, and then later on beat in the 1960s, becomes paramount, and still is today, what that results in is songs no longer having an equality between lyrics and melody. The lyrics have to take a lower position, a subordinate position, because the songs don't allow them to speak in their fullest sense. But in musical theatre, of course, you absolutely need the lyrics to speak. They are the way you navigate the story. And so I think that it is in the 1950s that we see the first break between the popular song and musical theatre. Up to that point, for the first half of the 20th century, the songs in shows were also the songs in the hit parade. They were the same thing. Musical theatre was popular song. In the 1950s, that bond was broken. Not all the time, of course, but in many ways. And suddenly, the popular song goes off in its own sweet way, through the hit parade and the charts. But musical theatre has to carry on doing what it always did, which was writing a song where melody and lyrics work together in order to progress the narrative of the wider story. And so, having bored you solidly for a good few minutes about this, it is my belief that it is the 1950s and the sudden precedence of rhythm and beat which subordinates lyrics, which separates musical theatre from popular song, which is a situation we're in today. You may disagree with me. I'd be very interested to hear what you think. Do please send me an email if you have a thought on this, or perhaps put something in a blog and send me the link to that. And if there are any interesting blogs, I'll advertise them in later programmes. However, I think that little coda to today's episode is quite enough of me, and I'm sure that's exactly what you're saying. Oh, I've had quite enough of him. So, having outstayed my welcome, it's probably time for me to say goodbye. So, I'm going to do that. Goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk edited and produced by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2013. And why not go along to our website and listen to previous episodes at www.musicaltalk.co.uk.